The fifth house in Vedic astrology represents intelligence, creativity, and expression. It is the house of inspiration, joy, and conscious creation. If the first house shows identity and the fourth house shows emotional foundation, the fifth house shows what flows from within you. It represents the ability to create something that did not exist before. Ideas, art, innovation, children. The fifth house is known as Putra Bhava. Traditionally, it represents children. But on a deeper level, it represents creative offspring. Anything that comes from your intelligence and imagination. This house governs intelligence, not basic learning, that belongs more to the fourth house, but creative intelligence, the ability to think independently, to interpret knowledge, to innovate. Because the fifth house represents the mind that creates rather than repeats. It is also the house of past life merit. In classical astrology, the fifth house reflects Purva Punya. This means blessings accumulated from previous karmic actions. A strong fifth house often indicates talents that appear natural, abilities that develop quickly, creative instincts that feel effortless, because the foundation for those abilities may have been built long before this lifetime. Now let's explore the fifth house and children. The fifth house traditionally governs childbirth and the relationship with children. But more broadly, it represents mentorship, teaching, guiding the next generation. Someone with a strong fifth house may naturally guide others. They may become teachers, advisors, mentors, because the fifth house expresses wisdom outwardly. Now let's examine the ruler of the fifth house. The fifth lord shows where creative intelligence is directed. If the fifth lord is placed in the 10th house, creative intelligence may support career success. If placed in the 11th house, ideas may generate income and social recognition. If in the 9th house, philosophy and higher knowledge may become life themes. If in the 12th house, creativity may be expressed through spirituality or introspection. Now, let's examine planets placed in the fifth house. The sun in the fifth house can create leadership through creativity, strong self-expression. The moon in the fifth house often produces emotional creativity, artistic sensitivity. Mars in the fifth house may produce competitive intelligence, strategic thinking. Mercury in the fifth house supports intellectual creativity, writing, communication mastery. Jupiter in the fifth house is considered highly auspicious. It supports wisdom, teaching ability, strong moral intelligence. Venus in the fifth house enhances artistic talent, love for beauty, romantic expression. Saturn in the fifth house may delay creative confidence, but it can produce deep intellectual discipline over time. Rahu in the fifth house may create unconventional creativity, strong desire for recognition. Ketu in the fifth house may create natural wisdom but reduced attachment to fame. Now let's explore the fifth house and romance. The fifth house governs romantic attraction, flirtation, the early stages of love, where the seventh house governs long-term partnership. The fifth house governs emotional excitement and romantic expression. Now let's examine key house connections. The fifth and ninth houses together form the Dharma axis. Creative intelligence aligned with wisdom. The fifth and 11th houses link creativity with gains. Ideas generating results. The fifth and 10th houses link creativity with career visibility. The fifth and first houses connect creativity with identity. Now let's examine the fifth house from the moon chart. From the moon, the fifth house reveals emotional creativity. How inspiration flows when the mind is relaxed. Someone may appear logical externally, but emotionally creative internally. Or the reverse. Both charts must be analyzed. Spiritually, the fifth house represents mantra and devotion. In many traditions, the fifth house is associated with mantra recitation, sacred sound repetition, because mantra refines the intelligence. It aligns the mind with higher awareness. The fifth house teaches conscious creation. What you create reflects what you believe. Ideas shape actions. Actions shape destiny. Strengthening the fifth house involves nurturing creativity, learning continuously, teaching others, engaging with art, philosophy, and knowledge, and developing self-awareness through reflection. Ultimately, the fifth house asks one profound question. What are you creating with your intelligence? Because creativity is one of the highest expressions of consciousness. Now that we understand the core meaning of the fifth house, let's explore its deeper karmic dimension. In classical Vedic astrology, the fifth house represents Purva Punya. Purva means previous. Punya means merit. This refers to blessings accumulated from past actions. The fifth house reveals the fruits of positive karma that were cultivated in previous lifetimes. These blessings often appear as natural talents, abilities that develop quickly, skills that feel intuitive rather than forced. For example, someone with a strong fifth house may naturally understand philosophy, i.e., art, or creative expression, because the seeds of those talents were planted long before this life began. Now let's explore the fifth house and intelligence in more depth. The Sanskrit concept associated with the fifth house is buddhi. Buddhi refers to higher intelligence, discernment, the ability to make wise decisions. This is different from basic memory or learning ability. The fourth house governs foundational education. The fifth house governs interpretive intelligence, the ability to take knowledge and apply it creatively. This is why the fifth house is strongly connected to leadership thinking. Leaders often rely on creative problem solving rather than memorized solutions. Now let's discuss the fifth house and risk taking. This house is traditionally linked to speculation, investments, trading, calculated financial risk. Perfect. This is part 2 of the fifth house masterclass designed to extend your video by another 20 minutes. It follows the same structure and tone as your other videos: deep interpretation, classical references, psychological plus karmic layers, Lagna and moon reminders, smooth pacing. Within ideas. Between paragraphs, you can paste this directly after your part 1 script in HeyGen. Week 16, fifth house in Vedic Astrology. Part 2, past life, karma, intelligence and conscious creation. Now that we understand the core meaning of the fifth house, let's explore its deeper karmic dimension. In classical Vedic astrology, the fifth house represents Purva Punya. Purva means previous. Punya means merit. This refers to blessings accumulated from past actions. The fifth house reveals the fruits of positive karma that were cultivated in previous lifetimes. These blessings often appear as natural talents, abilities that develop quickly, skills that feel intuitive rather than forced. For example, someone with a strong fifth house may naturally understand philosophy, art, or creative expression because the seeds of those talents were planted long before this life began. Now let's explore the fifth house and intelligence in more depth. The Sanskrit concept associated with the fifth house is buddhi. Buddhi refers to higher intelligence, discernment, the ability to make wise decisions. This is different from basic memory or learning ability. The fourth house governs foundational education. The fifth house governs interpretive intelligence, the ability to take knowledge and apply it creatively. This is why the fifth house is strongly connected to leadership thinking. Leaders often rely on creative problem solving rather than memorized solutions. Now let's discuss the fifth house and risk taking. This house is traditionally linked to speculation, investments, trading, calculated financial risk. Because speculation requires both intelligence and intuition. A strong fifth house may support successful speculative decisions. But speculation without discipline can lead to instability. So the strength of the fifth lord becomes extremely important. Now let's examine the fifth house and romance more deeply. The fifth house governs the early stages of love, attraction, excitement, romantic chemistry. It represents the joy of connection before long-term commitment develops. Where the seventh house governs marriage and partnership agreements, the fifth house governs emotional expression and romantic creativity. Someone with a strong fifth house often expresses affection openly, creatively, through gestures, ideas, and emotional presence. Now let's explore the fifth house and spiritual practice. In Vedic tradition, the fifth house is associated with mantra Shakti, the power of sacred sound repetition. Mantra practice refines the intelligence. It disciplines the mind, and it aligns thought patterns with higher awareness. Because the fifth house governs the mind's creative channel, mantra directs that creativity towards spiritual evolution. This is why many classical astrologers recommend mantra recitation to strengthen the fifth house. Now let's discuss planetary influences in more depth. When benefic planets influence the fifth house, creative intelligence flows smoothly. Wisdom becomes easier to express. When malefic planets influence the fifth house, creativity may require discipline to develop. But sometimes those challenges produce extraordinary depth, because struggle forces refinement. Now let's examine Rahu in the fifth house more closely. Rahu here can produce unconventional creativity, innovative thinking, strong desire for recognition through creative work. But it may also create restlessness in romantic relationships, or intense ambition in speculative ventures. Ketu in the fifth house may produce natural wisdom, philosophical insight, but sometimes detachment from public recognition. The person may create without seeking applause. Now let's explore the fifth house through the lens of destiny. The fifth house sits between the fourth and the sixth houses. Emotion on one side, work and struggle on the other. The fifth house represents inspiration between those two forces. Emotion fuels creativity. Creativity fuels action, and action shapes destiny. This is why the fifth house is considered a Dharma house, together with the first and ninth houses. These houses represent purpose, identity, wisdom, creative intelligence. Now let's discuss how to strengthen the fifth house, develop creative habits, study philosophy and higher knowledge, engage in mantra practice or meditation, teach others what you have learned, and cultivate curiosity. Because curiosity activates intelligence. When the fifth house becomes strong, life begins to feel meaningful. Ideas become clearer. Creativity becomes purposeful. And decisions become wiser. Ultimately, the fifth house asks a powerful question. Are you using your intelligence to create something valuable? Because the fifth house represents conscious creation. And conscious creation is one of the highest expressions of human potential. If this video on the fifth house helped you understand your intelligence, creativity, and past life merit more clearly, comment below whether you feel your creative energy flows easily or requires discipline. And if you're continuing this structured journey through Vedic astrology, make sure you're subscribed for next week's episode. Understanding life through the lens of Vedic astrology.